How do we do that before we get so broken?
And if I wouldn't have never gone through the anxiety and depression, or never would have gone through that relationship for 3 years that didn't work out, I never would have founded Armor.
Becoming the type of character that you want to be, much of it is in how we respond to circumstances.
And in my experience, the spirit of fear is the root of all mental health issues, anxiety, depression specifically.
It really is about creating a mindset.
Routine is such a great thing because through your routine, you see progress.
Rather than setting goals, if we would set our mind.
One of the things that can be so debilitating and sometimes humiliating is feeling like you're being attacked with no weapons to your disposal. And that's what mental health feels like sometimes.
We can't change anyone, we can't force anyone to change, but what we can do is provide them, equip them with the necessary tools, with the truth for one, with the weapons. It goes back to that understanding of that sword of truth. I'm in a place in my life where I realize, okay, so much has got to change, and I must drop everything about the way that I've been doing things. Because I see that, okay, things have not developed in the way that I've been hoping. For one, I also have learned to, come to a place where I need to quit hoping in the things that I've been hoping into. They may not be a bad thing. They may actually be the desires that God has placed in my heart to go after. But again, when we make more of that than His direction, His guiding, the relationship with Him, I've found where I relate it to Abraham and Isaac, where God calls you to lay down the gift. Like if the thing that I'm doing is the thing that I believe, hey, this is my gift. This is what I'm made to do. This is what I'm best at. But if God says to, hey, lay down your life, if you've made that your life, if you've made pursuit of doing something with that, and maybe not doing it in the right way, or not the way that God desires for your life, if you've made that your life, that's the life that you have to lay down. Mm-hmm. God says, hey, lay down your life. It's the same as Abraham, Isaac, where it's, hey, this is a gift that I promised to you, right? And I'm telling you to lay it down, sacrifice it, right? He wants that sort of that willingness, that obedience, to just, hey, I'm. The unfortunate part is that we get to such a place of desperation. How do we do that before we get so broken? That's one of the things I want to talk about. But I want to know from you a little bit about your background and what led you to becoming the founder of Armor Foundation.
Yeah. It was my own battle with mental health. I mean, this whole journey started with what you just described, and that was a searching and a longing for a purpose and fulfillment and contentment in my life. I got baptized at 24, and I came back in the church after being raised in a Christian home. And church was a priority, but it really wasn't necessarily a priority in my family. Like, I grew up on sports a lot, so most of my Sundays were baseball and football and all of these good things, And so when I got out of school, I started searching. I started really, really looking for God's will for my life and what am I here to do, And I think through that, there were some things that were answered, and that there are also some of the things that weren't so clear. And so one of the things that wasn't so clear is, things like marriage for my life, and things like, my job and my family. And I have so many dreams and desires, in my 20s that I expected to be completed within a certain timeline, And so one of those things was marriage for me. I mean, I really wanted to be married in my 20s. And the reason this is relevant is because most anxiety and depression, most mental health issues begin with actual relational issues. And not all, but most do. And so really what it was for me was a relationship that I had for 3 years with a girl that I thought I was going to marry. And that aligned with some of the things that I wanted, selfishly of like, I want to be married, I want to have family, I want to have kids. There's a lot of desires within me for those things, and there still is. But when that didn't work out, when that relationship didn't work out, and I felt God pulling me out of that relationship and pulling me into something else, my mind just couldn't handle it. And there was multiple instances where, I started to have physical symptoms of mental health, physical symptoms of anxiety and depression. The instances where I didn't sleep for 3 days straight twice. I could barely work. I could barely hold a conversation. I literally felt like my world was crumbling. And it was a whole lot more than being worried about something or being sad about something, which that's the common, nomenclature as it relates to mental health. Like, are you depressed? Well, what are you depressed about? Or what are you sad about? Well, in this case, it was all consuming. Like, anxiety and depression was all consuming for my life, And so in the midst of that, I really hit my knees literally, and, figuratively, on my kitchen floor. And it was a moment where I was asking God, what do you want me to do with this? And in the midst of that, there was an idea that came to mind that really came full circle, is that I want you to use your training experience as a boxing trainer, and I want you to train those. I want you to encourage those, and I want you to go find those that have gone through the same thing that you've gone through, or that will go through the same thing that you're going through.
Yeah.
And that was really the foundations of Armor, is taking something that I was really good at, taking something that I was really passionate about, and connecting it with a bigger purpose.
Yeah.
And not too complicated. It was rather simple, but I had been searching for that idea for years. And if I never have gone through the anxiety and depression, or never would have gone through that relationship for 3 years that didn't work out, I never would have founded Armor.
Yeah.
And that led us to start creating spaces for people to be vulnerable about what they're going through, vulnerable about mental health, and truly themselves, outside of a traditional therapy or counseling, setting, which is great. We encourage. There's very little places for people to actually be themselves and to be honest about what they're going through.
But you mentioned you're talking about intentionality.
Yeah.
Being intentional and connecting motion, right? Connecting the physicality with what's going on. You talked to, and intentionality is obviously huge.
Sure.
Being very intentional about, just even where you're at, being intentional about being in the moment is absolutely tremendous. Describe some. I remember numbers. You're talking.
Oh yeah,
the numbers.
Combination numbers.
Yeah.
Sure. So, like, for example, if you walked into a ring or walked into a training, session at Armor, and you heard the numbers 1, 2, 3, 6, you hear those numbers and you're like, oh, that's great. The numbers connect to punches, and so the odd numbers are your weak side. Your even numbers are your strong side. And so as you're doing these combinations, you're connecting the numbers with specific movements that you need and specific punches that you need to complete a combination.
Yeah. The
longer the combinations get, the more strain you have on your lungs, clearly, and the more strain you have on your body. Wow. Well, that also connects so well to battles with mental health, battles with anxiety and depression, because there's going to be moments where you're going to have to fight through the strain, through the pain, through whatever is, I call it the grip, the grip of, because anxiety and depression has such a grip, mental health has such a grip on many people, and has had a grip on me, and it pulls. And the more that in my journey and other stories, the more that you and that we learn to embrace the fight and the struggle, but then also push ourselves and test ourselves, to go beyond what we're used to going to, and the limit that we're used to going to.
Yep.
The more that battle becomes a little bit easier and more effective,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. It really is about creating a mindset, right? We need to understand that, our thoughts inform our actions. And the more we become rehearsed in thinking a certain way, the more our actions are going to change, which is going to then, obviously, of course, producing us typically good habits, right? We can form habits, whether they, good or bad. And that goes back to intentionality of being very intentional about the habits that you are forming, being very aware And again, that requires a mindset that is that you're in the moment, that you're present to understand why you're doing what you do. The human experience is not, it's not difficult to figure out. It really isn't. We all, you really have to be able to understand at a very fundamental level what motivates us, what drives us, and it can really be boiled down. In my opinion, I've discovered it can really be boiled down that we make choices based in either fear or love. And they're really
good.
Yeah, they're really the antithesis of each other.
The spirit of fear, and in my experience, the spirit of fear is the root of all mental health issues, anxiety, depression specifically. It's either so overly anxious to the point where, like I said, I did 2 instances where I didn't sleep for 3 days, but there's some sort of deep-rooted fear that it's connected with thinking, with what is referred to as mental ruts. You just mentioned habits. What are we thinking about? The right mindset is like many times the spirit of fear is the spiritual root of anxiety and depression. And it comes down to the ruts that you're thinking about. What are the mental patterns and what are things that you're consistently ruminating on or meditating on? Mm-hmm. And typically that'll take you right to the source of anxiety and depression and the source of, what we're fearful of in the first place.
Yeah.
I think the special thing about the armor of God is that God gave us something. And depending on who you talk to and, how people grew up, it's like, what has God given you? Going back to gratitude, it's difficult sometimes to find out what has God given me? Is it a loving family? Is it a house? Is it is it food? Is it water? Is it a great place to live, etc.? He's actually given us something, everybody. And that's the armor of God. But it's given to us for a purpose, and that purpose is to defeat and to go up against and to remove darkness from our lives so we can be free. And so armor boxing, the name comes from the armor of God, Ephesians 6:10. And it's something that I put on every day. And it's something that we all need to be equipped with, both as believers, and also new believers coming into the kingdom for the first time, is understanding what's the enemy. Like, is there an enemy? Who is he? And how does he work? And what can we do about it? I think one of the things that can be so debilitating and sometimes humiliating is feeling like you're being attacked with no weapons to your disposal. And that's what mental health feels like sometimes. You're being attacked with no weapons other than what the world gives you to your disposal. You got medication, you got therapy, you got people, community. That's awesome. That's great. But the fact of the matter is that God has given us weapons to go against our enemy. And make no mistake, mental health is a ploy. And depression, anxiety is a ploy by the enemy. We must be prepared and take a stand and use our armor effectively, specifically the offensive weapon, which the only offensive weapon is the word of God, So interesting that words on a page can be a weapon, but, make no mistake, that word's alive and living. And it's, as scripture says, the word of God is sharper than any two-edged sword. It's dividing soul and spirit, joint and marrow. It's got power. It's got a lot of power. And I've seen that work in my own life.
The power of words in general, right? Words can. It is very much a lie. Words will never hurt me. Rhyme. But, sticks and stones will break my words. Words are more. Words are more detrimental because they affect the mind. That's one of the things I've discovered. Is that's obviously where a lot of brokenness occurs in people, and a lot of brokenness occurs in people based on words that were spoken to them, or words that they have heard about them, whatever it may be. And typically, a lot of times, it happens at childhood too. We may have had a good family home, a good upbringing, and was provided for, but people that we loved, respected, that had their words had a lot of weight in our life. If they said something in a certain way, or said something that you just didn't know how to process as a child, because you're still figuring things out in the world, they can have such an effect on you that it can break you at an early age, and you never really know how to process that and deal with it. And in years down the road, as you as an adult, you might be able to recognize that. But really, the only way that you'll recognize that or can recognize that is again talking about the Word, being in the Word to really discover this about yourself. And if you don't have this relationship, this real relationship, this relationship with God, that where He can show you these wounds, show you these areas in your life where this is why you are the way you are, but you don't have to stay that way. I'm going to heal that, but it also requires, again, being very intentional about it, and staying grounded in that truth. And that is the foundation. The truth is everything. Truth is so much. Truth is the Word, right? And so if we're not founded on the Word, and again, that's what Jesus talks about. Anyone who hears these words of mine and does them is like a man who's built his house on a solid rock. That rock is the truth. That rock is the foundation. Should be the foundation of our life. But if we don't start out in that, if we don't train ourselves in that, if we don't if we're not aware of that armor and the weapon that we have, then it's easy to get diverted back into an old way of thinking. Again, it's about creating that mentality. Like, am I grounded in this? Am I like, how's the armor? Am I thinking from the right mindset? Because we know that that's everything. It all begins with our thoughts. So that's the foundation. The foundation is the truth. The foundation is the Word. And if I am inhabiting that zone, I will respond from that. And that's huge in instrumental in developing character, right? Becoming the type of character that you want to be. Much of it is in how we respond to circumstances. You're going to find that typically the things that are healthier in our life, that are going to lead to a better outcome, they typically require a little more effort, a little more focus, a little more intentionality, and so so many times it's so difficult to start something.
Sure.
We, by design, whatever, we want things to be easy. We don't want to do things that seem too difficult. So often the hardest part is taking that first step, flipping the switch. Sure. How do you get to that point? And this is the thing that I'm really interested in knowing, because it's been my experience in life, for most of my life anyway, that I don't get to that point to really take that first step until I'm so broken. Until I reach the point that, like, man, I know something's got to change. The pain of changing is less than the pain of staying the same. So, how do you how do you do that? How do you take the first step? How do you develop the mentality to, I've got to get out of this?
Right. Yeah. Well, two things come to mind, and those two things are, number one, no one's going to do it for you. You've got to own the process. We have to own the process. We have to own our own lives and own our next steps, if you will. So the first thing is that statement. No one's going to do it for you. Own it. The other thing is get in the water. So just the term get in the water, or put your foot in the water, or maybe a lot of other terms for it, but get in the water. So in other words, there's in the water and in the deep end of the pool. There's, even as a kid, you grow up, and as a kid who was initially in the kiddie pool, I always looked at the deep end and seeing my brothers playing Green River and playing all these games in the deep end. I'm like, oh, that's so cool. I can't wait to get to the deep end. Well, once you start swimming in the deep end of the pool, you realize just how deep that pool is, and there's some scary things in the water, But that doesn't necessarily, especially as a kid, that doesn't necessarily distract you or discourage you from getting in the water, because it's so much fun. You're with your friends. So I think taking your first step is a lot like getting into the deep end of the pool. There's all kinds of great things in the deep end of the pool.
Yeah.
We've talked about purpose, we've talked about fulfillment, but there's also, Scripture talks about mysteries of the kingdom. There's also mysteries to be found.
Yeah.
and there's things to be discovered about, life and about yourself and about your family, about, those that you love, and also about the journey in general. And so, and I'll give you an example. I mean, a way that, or one thing that comes to mind is my journey with prayer. And I hate praying. Honestly, I to say that is probably not the smartest thing, but I don't enjoy it. Let's just say that. I used to not enjoy it. And so I think starting with something that you love to do is pretty easy. Starting with something that you don't like to do and that's kind of scary is a different, animal in general. Yeah. So what I did, the first step that I took is I bought a book on literally how to pray. I didn't know how to pray effectively. Let's just say that. So I bought a book. That book shipped, and I read that prayer book from when I woke up. I read about 15 minutes when I woke up, about 15 minutes before I went to sleep. And eventually, probably after about a week or two, I started to notice a significant difference. My sleep and like how peaceful I was, and my motivation, in my connection with the Lord on a regular basis. So I think like taking a first step is important, but it doesn't have to be a huge one. It can simply just be dipping your toe in the water. Yeah. So go into the deep end and just dip your toe and say, what's going on? Go out, buy a book, go out, have a conversation, take somebody to coffee, start taking walks, go to the gym, So it's taking a first step. I don't think is necessarily the difficult part. The difficult part is taking steps long enough to see results. Yeah. Is to see the fruit. And that's why I talk about the prayer analogy. Is like buying the book is really not that hard. But reading the book on a consistent basis and actually believing that it's going to work is totally different until you start seeing fruit.
Right. It's important that we start, right? And the idea being that just get it in your mind, start small. Start small. It doesn't have to be this grand thing right away. With anything that we need to implement or want to implement into our lives, anything that we want to do that we know that is ultimately going to lead to a better outcome for us overall. Sure. Or even if it's if it's a goal for whatever work, whatever it may be that that you need to be able to achieve something. It's about understanding that you start small, but it's okay to not despise the small things.
You don't despise these small beginnings.
Yeah, understand that starting small is okay, and that I think so often what I know that I've had a tendency to do is to want to be able to jump right into doing the thing at full throttle, and I will. And I found in my life, it's the fun stuff, the stuff that like really appeals to us to do the thing anyway, right? So you jump into it and you'll take on too much at once, and you end up burning out. So it's no good for us to have this goal in front of us and like see this thing that we want to do, become, whatever it is, and feel as if like, well, unless I've got to like go all out all at once. That's always been my problem. Too much, too fast. Start small. Build to it, right? So I'm always reminded of I had a coach in football, high school, that would say to the offense, all we need is 3.5 yards every play. 3.5 yards every play. And you look at a 100-yard field and you condense it down to 3.5 yards every time. And that also reminds me, as much as it pains me to say it, because we're both went to Auburn. Nick Saban. That's another thing that he will also talk about is not looking at this goal way out in front at the end of the season and being national champions, but it's about doing what is in front of you. Like what's the very next step to that, and we're talking about like break it down very fundamentally. Like what is in the in-game situation, it's about getting that next 3.5 yards, right? Sure. But in preseason, it's about it's just building the fundamentals. Right. Sometimes it is just about going back to go forward. Also, there's a big thing over the last maybe 6 months of my life. A place that that I've inhabited that mindset of going back to go forward, understanding that I need to go, like, I need to build a foundation, right? A foundation. It goes back to a foundation, building a house. We're referred to as, we can consider ourselves as a house, in Scripture. We're a house. We're to be the temple. God's house, essentially. So, we need to have a strong foundation. In order to produce the fruit that He desires us to produce, which is spiritual, right? And so our foundation is His Word, which is, again, is from the Spirit, which is truth. So if we don't stay, if we don't have a good foundation, then we'll start to build askew, and you can't start from the second floor. Right? You don't start building on a second floor of a house. You start with a foundation. And sometimes, I think in most all of our lives, we have to go back we have to allow things to be, we got to tear down. Like we've been building, there's been things and building with poor materials, all kind of things. Yeah. And there needs to be this excavation first. Like we need to get back down to the good ground. The physical aspect is always more relatable for a lot of people. So some people don't have any experience with being physically in great condition and having the, let's just put it in, they want to, they have a goal of a certain weight because they've always maybe dealt with that sort of issue or whatever. They've never had the experience of what it's like. So if you don't have that, if you don't have an understanding of, well, I know that if I can commit to this, this is what will be produced. Mm-hmm. What is the motivation otherwise? How do you?
Yeah. It has to connect with to your point. One of the things that came to mind whenever you were explaining that was God is a God of order. And so what that means is that whenever we seek Him, we seek His kingdom, and we seek His will for our lives, it's in a fashion and in an architectural and an orderly fashion. Mm-hmm. He loves order. He loves organization. Additionally, just like it's orderly, it's got to connect with a deeper purpose. It's got to connect with something greater than yourself and something that is beyond just you. And so in order to take a first step, you got to know you've got to know the reason you're doing so is because it connects with a greater and a deeper purpose for your life, or else you're probably not going to take the first step in general, to your point, if you don't know what the results feel like or what the results might be like, So it really takes faith. It takes faith to take a step, and God's faithful to give us enough faith to take that first step, depending on what it is and, how it connects with the bigger picture of our individual stories and over the kingdom story in general. But it's got to connect with a deeper vision and a deeper purpose, greater than ourselves. Yeah, that's what I would say.
Yeah. So speaking on taking the first step, going back to like mental health and depression, sure. Because I've also dealt with depression and what first steps are incredibly important with that, because coming out, like when you're in it, when you're like just weighed down with the depression and taking a step to do anything sometimes can be just so burdensome. I mean, you just can't find any drive to be able to pull yourself up to do that. And there are things that that ultimately that would be healthy, would be good for you, would be would help you get out of this, but you just cannot do it.
Sure.
Tell me a little bit about like that experience from your own experience, but also how would you suggest, like in those moments for individuals, like what do we need to do?
I used to write down 4 letters in my journal every day, and before I even get to those 4 letters, I would say doing something as simple as writing, and as simple as getting your thoughts onto paper and into a way where depression can be debilitating, right? Like you said, and completely and totally comprehensive. Getting your thoughts and getting what's going on down on paper, that's a first step. That's taking a first step. I used to write 4 letters, SSPM. social, spiritual, social, physical, and mental. You just write down a goal, one little bitty, tiny. A social could be calling a family member or calling a friend. Spiritual could be reading one page of the Bible or praying for 10 minutes. Physical would be taking a walk for a mile. And then mental would be, I haven't talked about this just yet, but I used to have note cards that I would write for all my mental ruts. So like whatever I am continuously ruminating on. Mm-hmm. So whether it's, if I'm sitting in depression, or maybe I'm, I've got the blinds closed and I'm sitting in my bed, I'm a failure, or my life is never going to get better. This is permanent. Something of that nature. Any ruminating thoughts or any mental ruts that, we are meditating on, I used to write those down all the time. So doing 3 note cards, like figuring out, okay, this is my mental rut. And then on the back, I would write a truth or a scriptural truth. Yeah. So, something like, I will have hope and optimism towards my future because Jesus Christ is for me. Some kind of statement that aligns with truth, that aligns with scripture. I started to do these things on a regular basis, and it completely changed everything about my mental state. In general. And
there you go. Regular basis, routine. Consistent routine.
That's right.
Yeah. That's so critical. But even still, like, so let's say you've done this. There are things that you've done for a regular amount of time.
Sure.
But still, you find yourself in a rut, and for whatever reason, you just can't even bring yourself to making the notes or to reading the cards, or it's that easy. Like, just pick up the card. Really, when it comes down to it, it's that easy. Just pick up the scripture, pick up the word. How do you what pulls you out then? What gets you to the place that you realize that, again, we're talking about, like, in the mid, like, I've experienced depression where I've gone through it for maybe 5 days, whatever, and finally I just can't be this way anymore. Right? I can't stay in this. How do we get to the point that we will act before we just can't stay this way anymore?
I know what the answer is for me.
Okay.
And the answer for me immediately is turn on music. Immediately. Now, I say that practically because we're all wired differently. So music for me and worship music for me just happens to be my love language, and it just happens to be my fuel. So if I listen to 2 or 3 songs in a row while laying in my bed not doing anything, I know I'm going to have some kind of encouragement and some kind of motivation to get up and do something. So instead of asking yourself, what can't you do? What can you do? What can you do? And so for me personally, it just has to be worship music. For somebody else, it could be writing. For some reason, somebody else, it could be having a conversation, calling somebody. For somebody else, it could be going outside and moving and walking. It's what can you do? What can you do, and what gives you fuel? But we are all created in a very delicate and a very unique sense. There's nothing new under the sun. So God knows what makes us tick. He knows what's going to give us exactly what we need at that time, and it's really Him. He gives us what we need.
Yeah.
Yeah. But in that case, that's. Personally, I can't answer that for another person. I can answer that for myself, though.
Yeah,
for sure.
For me personally, what I have found, when I've finally come to discover, because of the fact that I've been in situations where, like, I know if I could just make a phone call, if I could just do this, if I could, just get my mind out of this space of, ultimately what it comes down to is this mindset of lack, or, because, for me, again, like, where I'm not, or what I don't have, or what I've not accomplished, whatever, so you just start, this weight, presses down on you. For one, knowing what you have been given. For one, that's huge. Knowing what you have done, knowing what you like, just being, again, we talked about having an attitude of gratitude, being grateful, for another day. Again, unless you develop the mindset for me again particularly, if making the most of your life is achieving certain goals or level of success, whatever, like we said, according to the world standards, according to the idea that you've placed on yourself of your value or whatever, then and then you're not meeting that, then you can feel as if like you're not achieving, you're not winning or whatever. But if we change our mindset to understand that our life is meant to be lived in a way that we can serve others, lived in a way that we are going to be more fulfilled if we will use what we have been given in order to help others, right? In order to that others might benefit, in order that you might be able to develop others, grow others, help collaborate with one another, whatever it may be. If you're living from a mindset of what inventorying my resources and understanding what I have and how can I use that to help others, to serve, to love. I have recently, only very recently, I have discovered that I wouldn't say I've went into a level of like deep depression, but I've went to a level of like just not having a drive or a motivation, and I've discovered that what has changed that is understanding that I've got to get going because I want to be able to do that. Now have this mindset of things that I want to be able to do to create opportunities for others. I have these things that I want to do so that I can put others in a place that they can do what they do best. So that now is what drives me rather than me. Like doing what I'm like, what I want. Anything that I've been pursuing based on me getting to a certain place, right. Getting, having a title, having a certain level of success again by worldly standards. And now it's outside of me. It's knowing that being intentional about letting others know my plans about what I want to be able to, because I know that these people, they're also, in a sense, now that I've made this known, like I know that I have this level of accountability to them as well. Like if I'm not doing this thing, if you're not seeing this occur, then I'm letting you down, because now I know that this is the thing that this is what drives me. It's others, not me. Everyone has a thing. We're all wired a little differently. We all have, obviously different personalities, different things motivate us, whatever, etc. But I do think that we can all find commonality and understanding that until we lay down our life, and until it's not about us, until we understand that it's not about us, and that we shouldn't be living for self, but we should be living in a way that we can utilize what we have, our gifts. You speaking of every day, you're talking about like writing things, right? Making notes, right? And it reminded me of, again, one really healthy thing that I found for being able to move forward every day is every night being able to write what's my to-do list? What do I plan to be able to do tomorrow? And I have that in front of me so that I know what my day is going to be. Now I say that I know that what my day is going to be, but I'm also living in such a point that I'm okay with, I come to God in the morning. You're talking about prayer, right? And how difficult it can be. And again, we're talking about routine and creating a healthy routine of being able to do these things, taking the small steps. What I found is like, for one, if we will develop a mindset of doing that early and often, first and foremost, if I'm going to go and I'm going to take these plans that I've written, that I'm hoping that is your desires for me, I'm going to go and I'm going to put them before you and say, look, this is in your hands. And if I need to not value what I think that needs to be done over being in the moment, so if something comes across my path, or if someone comes along my way, if I can't give them proper time and attention, or because I'm thinking that I need to be achieving this, that this needs to be accomplished, that I'm placing that above loving somebody else, then I need all that needs to go away, and I need to be okay with you adjusting, you directing the steps. Like if this is not what I need to do today, that's fine too. Like being in that mindset, because again, if we hang on so tightly to where we think we need, or how we think things need to go, then when circumstances arise that don't line up with what we were hoping to do, then we can end up responding in a poor, negative way, and then we're not capable of being who we need to be. So being able to let go of all of that, even if I'm coming to the understanding that even if the desires that I have are the desires that have been given to me of God, if I value that more than the direction and what He desires me to be doing in them, if I value that, prioritize that over others, then I'm missing it. So when you're able to let go, so much more opens up to you. But in creating routine, I've always been resistant to prayer as well, and I think again it's because because you've not done it, you've not enough consistently enough either, and you've not had the experience of what the results are like, right? So it's about understanding that again, starting small, and prioritizing, developing a mindset of intentionality of like, this is going to happen. And that's why I was telling you, like, creating routine, what's one of the things that's been really helpful is using the Echo Dot, the thing, right. As a reminder. It will tell me at this time at a certain day, do this, and if I don't, it's up to me then to respond. And that's the big thing that I found too, is just responding right away.
Right.
Responding right away, doing the thing right away. Again, if we're going to create habit, if we're going to create a healthy routine, it's about doing the thing, right? You've got to do the thing, even if it's, again, small steps, even if it's just a little at a time. Do a little every day. It's the what is it? 5 swings, I think. John Maxwell talks about chopping down a huge tree or something. It's like, just taking 5 swings at it.
Right.
It's this achievable amount that over time, with consistency, you're going to see the progress. But it doesn't happen right away, and that's and again, we live in a culture that, like, we expect things instantly.
Of course. So
what's your experience with with seeing progress? How long does it normally, what should we put time limits on things?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that, depending on what it is, that's such a consulting answer, but I think time limits are good. I think check-ins are good. I think inventory is really good. One of the things that I was thinking of before we even had this conversation was the inventory of your thoughts. I mean, I talked about that a lot, but just like, I think understanding what you're doing, and in this case, when I talk about specifically mental health, what am I thinking, and how those thoughts are changing on a consistent basis. So it's like routine, to go back to your point, routine is such a great thing because through your routine, you see progress. I mean, just like in the gym. I mean, if you've gone to the gym for 2 or 3 weeks, you realize that you're sweating a little bit less than you were 3 weeks ago. And you're struggling a little bit less than you were 3 weeks ago, if you will. Same thing with routine. So if you're constantly checking in with yourself, like, of what you're thinking, what your thought patterns are they consistent? Are they the same day to day to day to day? Or are they changing a little bit? That's going to help you see progress. So I do think putting not a time limit of saying, like, if it's not better by 2 weeks, I'll give up or anything of that nature, but having regular and consistent true inventories and check-ins is really, really key. Yeah. Or else progress is probably not going to be as visual or as obvious as it would if you were constantly checking it with yourself.
Yeah.
So I think time is a really good thing. I think limits are a great thing. but at the same time, don't put limits on the overall health. Put limits on or put time consistencies or time limits on how much you check in with yourself, because I think that's going to be really, really
Well,
important.
you bring up a really good point, and you talked about order. You talk about and God is a God of order, and honestly, he laid out a design for us at the very beginning. And you're talking about checking in and creating this opportunity. That's what I've come to discover the Sabbath has been for me.
That's good.
And it's so important. It's so critical that we understand that this is something that it's for us. Jesus said that it is for us. The Sabbath is for us. It's for man. And why? Because again, you look back at the very beginning, and here's how it's laid out. 6 days you will work, and on the seventh you will rest. And what I've discovered is, I absolutely typically will go hard, working towards something, and it's easy to skew. It's easy to get off course of like, wait, what is my mindset right? Is my focus right? Is my trajectory right? Am I aligning myself with the way that God desires me to do this stuff? And if I don't pull back and have a day of rest where I'm not doing the things that I typically do during the week, I lay all of that aside and I allow for myself to recalibrate. I allow for myself to make sure that I am realigned, or that okay, and where have I been missing the mark, and am I still on the right path? Am I still understanding the importance of really keeping that day and understanding what it's about? It's about being very intentional about being aligned with the will of God, being aligned with the prioritizing. Again, I've found that I'm working on developing so many different things. And sometimes the week to week, the priority has to shift to, this is what I want you to really focus on. This needs to take priority right now, because there's a schedule, there's a time. These things need to be done first in order to have to lay the foundation first. So I found that's really, really key to your what did you call it? Checking in. What was the word for it?
It's. I mean, you could put a. It's your self check-ins or any kind of time consistencies that you put on it.
We have a weekly opportunity to do that, but how many of us don't? How many of us don't? Intentional. Like, again, I get it. Maybe many of us take a weekend and rest, but how often are we really intentional about, well, what are we prioritizing? What is our focus? What do we need to change? What do we need to toss out that we may have picked up during the week? Because again, the things that we consume can be so influential. Like, is this creating again certain thought patterns and negativity in my life? Like, what have I done during this past week? Look back and say, okay, well, has anything hindered me from living to the full every day, to reaching the potential that I have every day? And speaking of potential, again, understanding what that is, and realizing that it doesn't necessarily, it's not going to be through worldly standards. We have to be able to drop all of that and understand that, our full potential is becoming the person that God desires us for us to be. That's what's important, and you also talked about, or we kind of went there. One of the things that I want to discuss is, understanding that if we would, rather than setting goals, if we would set our mind, it's healthy to have something to be moving toward. Particularly if you know that, well, this is the thing that I should be moving toward. This is the desires that God has put in my heart. This is what I should be working toward. Rather than set goals, we need to set our mind. And I'll put it in a physical understanding again. If you're trying to lose weight, rather than putting this numerical value on it, if you would set your mind to becoming the person that is going to make the choices that will naturally lead to you being this way, what happens is it becomes a lifestyle rather than this temporary, well, I've met this goal. Because what happens is we keep going yo-yoing, we go back and forth, back and forth.
Sure.
But if we'll set our mind to being the person that is naturally going to achieve this outcome for the longevity of our life, then we'll be able to be consistent with our choices. And that being said, I mean, that can apply to anything, not just physically, but again, if we have this goal out for, what we feel that we've been given to develop, or, if I will set my mind to becoming the person, the character, doing the things that I know that are ultimately going to lead to the small steps that are ultimately going to lead to that overall vision, instead of trying to jump right away into the big thing. Again, we always want to start right away with this huge scale, but it takes the first and foremost becoming the person that is going to be capable of taking on those kind of responsibilities.